I'm Deborah Shorley and I'm Director of Library Services at Imperial College, London.
What sort of open access policy does Imperial have?
At Imperial we do a number of things to advocate open access. We don't at the moment have a mandate for open access deposit of material published by college researchers, but we are very, very close to having that mandate. We're going very carefully about this, and that will of course change how we manage things. Meanwhile, we're doing an awful lot of support. We help researchers in their relationships with the funding councils, with their grant applications, when they have a responsibility to deposit their material in an open access repository. We explain to our researchers about how copyright works. We also, of course, advocate the use of archive and PubMed, and I should say that we are very pleased that now Jisc Collections has agreed to contribute to the costs of archive for the whole of the UK, which I regard as a great step forward, not just, of course, for us at Imperial College, but elsewhere.
You mentioned repositories there, but what about open access journals? How is Imperial helping its researchers to get their material into these open access journals?
Well, in a number of ways, partly above all by explaining to them how it all works. When researchers are used to a very traditional publishing model, which has been on the go for centuries, they find the whole concept of open access journals in some cases quite difficult and quite scary. They're scared of being against the law, they're scared of compromising their relationship with the publishers, they're scared that it will take more time, that it will be more work for them, and that's a really big issue at a time when everybody's under great pressure to publish, and to publish fast, and to publish a lot. So we help them in all sorts of ways, both informal and formal.
Could you elaborate on some of those ways a bit more?
Certainly. Well, for example, we work with the early career researchers. We give presentations to the graduate schools explaining what open access means, what it means for individual researchers, how they can best make use of open access, not just for their material, but how they can find material that is on open access to help them do their research. So in all sorts of practical ways. And that, I think, is one of the most important things we do, because it's the young researchers that need to understand about this.
You mentioned the fear that researchers have that it's going to create more work for them. Are there things that Imperial is doing, or that other institutions are doing, to try and make that part of it easier, to make it part of their natural workflow so that it doesn't feel like this extra thing they have to do?
We're doing a lot to make it easy for researchers to deposit their material in an open access repository. Most importantly for us, we have Spiral, which is our institutional repository, and it has been recognised as an exemplar of good practice by Jisc, so we're very proud of that. It is very elegant, it works very simply, and very importantly, it links directly with Symplectic, which is the system that our researchers at Imperial use to organise their research publications. So they don't have to do a great deal of work themselves, and if they're puzzled, we help them do it. There is an issue, and I think it's an issue that none of us have entirely cracked. A lot of researchers would like somebody else to do the whole process for them. They'd like to be able to say, this is it, now you put it in the repository form for me. We can, of course, do that. It's very labour intensive, and in a sense, does it matter where that work is done? Researchers would argue that it's possibly not the sort of work that they should be doing, but we believe that with the right education and training, they'll find it's as easy as booking a flight online. So we would advocate training them to do it themselves. And then, of course, they have real ownership of it. They see the whole process from start to finish.
And where should responsibility for that advocacy lie? Is that with the library, or is it with another part of the institution? Who takes responsibility for that?
I think that if we're going to have a real success with open access, and I very much hope we shall, then institutions as a whole need to take responsibility for advocating it. Of course, the library can play an enormous role. We can play a role not just with practical help, but also explaining the background to issues and holding people's hands, if you like. But I do believe that the whole the whole of Imperial College needs to understand the implications of open access and the need for open access. The research office, the senior management, our senior management at Imperial is very committed to making sure that all research is well publicised, that Imperial College's research is seen by everybody across the world, and for that reason alone, the whole college needs to take responsibility for making sure that it happens. And I think they will.
And as part of that responsibility, is a policy enough, or does it need to be a mandate?
Mandates for open access deposit are very important, but there are problems with them. The first of which, of course, is that it's not the whole story, it doesn't solve the whole thing. And the second thing is that it's very, very difficult to, and I hate using the word police, but police is the word I'm going to use, it's very difficult to make sure that all the material that should be deposited on open access has been deposited on open access. And what strictures have you got? How do you, as it were, punish people? This is not, I think, the way we want to go. We want to see it as a very positive thing. And to that extent, a mandate is a very useful instrument, but it's not the whole story. I think far better is to create a climate where open access seems the best alternative.
If you decide to go down the policy route, how do you evaluate how effective that policy is?
It's very difficult to know in the short term how effective your open access policy has been. In the longer term, of course, you can start measuring not just the proportion of your material, your research material that has been published on open access, but even more importantly, the amount it's been cited, because there is now real hard evidence that material deposited on open access receives more citations than material that hasn't been. And that's something that I think is not just a measurement in itself, but it's something that demonstrates that it's a real benefit for everybody.
How is Imperial getting that point across to researchers that if they do make their work open access, it will get more citations and it will benefit them in the long run, or in the short term as well?
We in the library are doing a lot of work at individual level with researchers and with individual departments at Imperial to draw their attention to the very impressive evidence about citations of open access material. We have very good support librarians, subject support librarians, faculty support librarians who are working with the department and saying, look at this mathematician, look at this material, look at which of his papers has been published on open access and see how many of those are being cited and see how they're being cited. And very interestingly, quite often cited in open access articles. And that's wonderful because this is the beginning of a whole chain that will, I think, lead somewhere very good.
Imperial is clearly making great steps in this field. What advice, from your perspective, would you offer to other librarians, other people in your position, to help to move this forward and emulate some of the success of Imperial?
I'm not sure. It's kind of you to say we've been successful. I think we have been successful in making sure that we're creating a climate where open access is a real option. I don't think we're as far ahead as some people, and I'm not embarrassed to say that. I think across the country people are doing all sorts of things in very different ways, and we've all learnt from one another. But if I were going to give one piece of advice to colleagues, I would say get the message across. Of course, make sure that your institutional repository is good, make sure the processes are simple, make sure that you have the backup to provide the information, but above all, get the message across that this is good for your institution, it's good for research. I sometimes think we're disappointingly parochial, because we shouldn't think just about our own institution. We should think about what the real purpose of all this is. The real purpose of this is making sure that good research is made more widely available to enable other people to do good research and make that more widely available, and that would be for the benefit of us all. We do an awful lot of work on malaria at Imperial, and it's always struck me that malaria, of all examples, is a problem which is a global problem, which has to be dealt with globally, and for which it's critically important that the right information is available for the right people to do the right research in the right way, so that we presumably, hopefully, can conquer this for the world. So let's get away from institutions. Let's think why open access itself matters. It matters because research should be made publicly available.